The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is day 4 of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in September 2021, and we are more than halfway through the sesshin. I'd like to share again with you some of the teachings of some of the just talks of Yamada Mitra-roshi, teacher of Harada Shodo-roshi, from this book, Zen Master Hakuin's Song of Zazen. And there's a photograph of Mitra-roshi there on the cover. He was unique in a number of ways as a Zen master in Japan. First of all, as you could see, he had a beard and long hair, and he chose to not shave his head or his face in order to be to appear more accessible to ordinary human beings who were not monks. He also taught women, including Daichi Priscilla Storant, who was an American woman, is an American woman, who actually grew up in Ithaca, New York, and went to her first sesshin at Rochester Zen Center. Hitchhiking to sesshin, Chisan, as we call her, is an interesting character. She also hitchhiked her way around Japan for many years and learned Japanese through that means. She would go to truck stops and hitch a ride to wherever she needed to go with a truck driver. And she said most of the time they were drunk, which is putting some lives at risk. But at any rate, she did hitchhike to Rochester. And I believe it was in the early 70s. And went to a sesshin. However, the car she was riding in had a car accident. And so she arrived hurting and somewhat injured, not seriously injured, but sesshin was quite physically painful for her as a result. And she likes to tell the story of Doksan with Roshi Kaplo, in which he corrected her in how she proceeded into the Doksan room and did her bows and so on and so forth. And she was incensed at being corrected. But many, many years later, she realized that was actually a deep teaching. He was pointing out her attachments, and she was bumping right up into her self-image of being somebody who was doing the right thing or whatever she wanted to do, and that was fine. Chisan remains something of an old hippie, but she is deeply, deeply developed in her Zen practice and is now really a Roshi. She is teaching Zoom these days because she's in Japan at Tahoma Monastery and through their off the island sitting place, Watermoon Dojo. Her mission in life, she feels, is to support Harada Roshi in his teaching. And she's been a tremendous assistant to him, translating Teishos at Bukoguchi. When I went to sesshin there, the Rohatsu sesshin in Bukoguchi once. The teaching was done entirely in Japanese. It was recorded. A recording was sent over to the home of Belinda, an American woman who was married to a Japanese monk, whose temple was one of the tourist temples. And she would translate it. And then in the afternoon, she would come back, and the 4 or 5 foreigners who wanted to listen to it would sit there, and she would simply read what she had translated. With Chi-san, however, it's almost a simultaneous translation, although it's not exactly simultaneous, because in recording these teishos, it was very clear to me that the Roshi would go on for 25 minutes of speaking and then give Chi-san the opportunity to translate. But she must have a phenomenal memory, because she was able to take it all in, translate it into a way that Westerners could understand it, with all the emphasis, with all the emotional color and the rest of it that the Roshi was giving out himself. It was a tremendous gift. And she continues to do that in the United States and at Sogenji. In Europe, there's a German woman who is fluent in Japanese, and she's the one that translates for him when he's there. And there's also a Russian woman, ditto. So at any rate, Chi-san and Mitra-roshi, who was known as Do-san back then, Shodo, were good friends at Shofukuji. And they eventually thought that it would be really helpful and a good direction to go in to set up an American temple in the Seattle area. Chi-san was familiar with Seattle, having gone there. Let me back up a minute on this particular story. When she went to high school, she was good friends with a young man who ended up enlisting in the military. It was the Vietnam War period. I don't know if he enlisted or if he was drafted. One or the other, he ended up in the military in Vietnam and became severely well, he was suffering severely from post-traumatic stress. He had disappeared. She had a sense and hitchhiked all the way to Seattle because she had a sense that he was there. Nothing beyond some innate sense. No letters, no communication, nothing beyond an innate sense that he was there, and found him and got him into some medical help. He was never able to function normally. He may have had some brain challenges before he was drafted. I don't know, because I didn't know him before. I did meet him afterwards, and he would come to tea with Roshi and became Roshi's student. Roshi teaching at whatever level anyone was at. And this by then not so young man found healing in his encounters with the Roshi. And all of this was at the hands of Chi-san. She also had a sixth sense one day while living at Sogenji that there was something bad going on up behind the Hondo, which is the big building where we would chant every morning for an hour, and where ceremonies were held. And so she went up behind the building and found a man trying to hang his wife. And she explained to him that it was not good karma for him to do that. And so he took the rope down and left, and she dutifully followed him. Chi-san has got a tremendous warm heart and a depth of understanding as well. And it was a gift to experience her translations. It is a gift to experience her translations and her presence. She's really funny. there was a big ceremony at Tohama Monastery in which Roshi was installed as the head abbot. Chisan was installed as the second abbot, and Dairin was installed as the third abbot. And Roshi had Chisan. He provided Chisan with the official clothing, and for her it was the top level of clothing, a purple robe, which was only given to people at high accomplishment, really to Roshis, or people who would be Roshis very soon. And so she asked me to take a photograph of her, and she was wearing Crocs at the time, which was not exactly the the standard footwear under those circumstances. But she said, be sure to get my Crocs in the picture. So anyway, that's Chisan, but I have diverged. Mitra-roshi allowed Chisan to train. She didn't get to live there like she does get to live at Sogenji, but she got to go to sesshin, not only as a foreigner, but also as a woman. And a number of foreigners trained with Mitra-roshi, and that again was unusual in that year. In fact, Roshi himself has taken flack from his Dharma brothers for taking foreigners as students. But the foreigners were the ones that wanted to train. The Japanese have been sort of culturally in the same position that Americans were after the Second World War, when suddenly there was money, people could buy things, there were things to buy, the economy was booming, and people were much more interested in getting and having. And it's the same in Japan. They are far less interested in Zen Buddhism or religion in general, spirituality in general. Although there are a number of spiritual paths. The acupuncture woman that I was going to on a regular basis at when I was living at Sogenji, because of the condition I had at the time, once said to me how impressed she was that I did Zen practice. And my response to her was, I was terribly impressed with her because she partook of a practice in which people stood under waterfalls in icy weather in simple cloth robes and chanted. And to me, standing under an icy waterfall in the winter is not my idea of fun. But she thought that sitting long hours in the Zendo and getting whacked by the Keisaku also was pretty frightening. So different strokes for different folks. Another time I was coming back from being in town, and I stopped and sat on a bench to have a snack. And a Japanese woman came by. Then she turned around, came back, and said, "Are you a Buddhist?" I was dressed in samugi, the temple clothing. And I said, "Yes." And she said, "That's so interesting. I'm a Christian." In fact, she said, what was it? Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. But she was just amazed, and people were amazed that foreigners took up Zen. So that said, let me get to Mitra-roshi. This is titled The Other Shore of Wisdom. The appearance of the Rinzai teacher Bankei Yotaku, whose dates are 1622 to 1693. So he predates Hakuin. In the Edo period, was a very welcome event for the Zen school at the time. He taught the school's essential essentials using simple language that could be easily understood by ordinary people. He would tell them, for example, that a person's mind, his fundamental nature, he also referred to it as the pure mind of self-nature, is like a mirror. Nothing whatever exists in that mirror, and because that, it reflects all things. Any person or object coming before it is reflected, and when the person or object is no longer present, the reflection disappears. Although the mirror reflects persons and objects, it does not produce anything or bring anything into existence. It merely reflects their image. And when the person or object is no longer there and the image vanishes, nothing has perished. This unborn and undying mind is our original nature. It reflects a beautiful flower, but that does not mean that the mirror is beautiful. It reflects filthy dog droppings, but that does not mean it is filthy. This is what the Heart Sutra means about all things being not stained and not pure. And let me diverge a second and share the Tibetan Buddhist comment on this. This is from Luminous Mind, The Way of the Buddha, which is the teachings of Kala Rinpoche. And somewhere in here. Natural mind has a quality of clear transparency in which its three essential aspects exist spontaneously: emptiness, clarity, and unimpededness. Mind's transparency is its essential emptiness. Its knowing and luminous nature is its clarity, and the aspects of its enlightened experience are its unimpededness. When mind is in this pure state of limpid transparency, open and lucid, it is fully aware in a state of bare awareness. It is pristine awareness in all, hang on a sec. It is pristine awareness, unimpeded, experiencing in itself its limitless manifestations in all their aspects. This empty awareness, clear and unlimited, is not far from us. It is our actual face. It is our actual face. But like our own face, it cannot perceive itself. This is what we call ignorance, which is simply the absence of bare awareness. In order to get beyond ignorance, we have to see its empty nature without conceptualizing. Then we must accustom the mind to this experience and gradually stabilize it so that it remains free from distraction under all circumstances. This is how practice progresses. But remember that these essential qualities of mind are not anything we have to try to produce. They are mind's very nature, and we have only to recognize them. We have only to recognize them. And this is what we are working to do through our Zazen, through our Zen meditation. And I'd like to share also something from a book called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. These are the teachings of Namkai Norbu. Nope, not Namkai Norbu. These are traditional teachings. The foreword is by Namkai Norbu. And it's not saying, okay, it's Padmasambhava, who is one of the most famous historical figures in Tibetan Buddhism. Now, when you are introduced to your own intrinsic awareness, the method for entering into it involves 3 considerations. Thoughts in the past are clear and empty and leave no traces behind. The Zen master, the 6th patriarch, Huineng, the Chinese Zen master, the man who's responsible really for expanding Zen practice, Buddhist practice throughout China, awakened as a 19-year-old when he heard an itinerant traveler reciting the Diamond Sutra. And when it came to this set of words, arouse the mind without its abiding anywhere. Arouse the mind without its abiding anywhere. He had a deep awakening and eventually became the 6th patriarch. He was uneducated. His father had been highly educated. He was a government official who ran into problems with policy and was banned and sent off to the edge of the country to where he was theoretically safely out of political access. And there he married a local woman who was not schooled, and they had a child. And at a time, just before the time when the father would have begun teaching Huineng how to read and write, and he started when their kids were about 4 years old back then, and he died. So Huineng never had the opportunity to learn how to read and write, and instead grew up helping his mother survive by collecting twigs and branches and later cutting bigger pieces of wood to sell for firewood. And it was when he was delivering a load of firewood to one of his clients that he overheard that man reciting that famous line, arouse the mind that abides nowhere. And this is what it is speaking of here. Thoughts in the past are clear and empty and leave no traces behind. Thoughts in the future are fresh and unconditioned by anything, so they don't leave any traces. And in the present moment, when your mind remains in its own condition without constructing anything, awareness at that moment in itself is quite ordinary. And when you look into yourself in this way nakedly, without any discursive thoughts, since there is only this pure observing, there will be found a lucid clarity without anyone being there who is the observer. Only a naked manifest presence, manifest awareness is present. This awareness is empty and immaculately pure, not being created by anything whatsoever. It is authentic and unadulterated without any duality of clarity and emptiness. It is not permanent, and yet it is not created by anything. However, it is not mere nothingness or something annihilated because it is lucid and present. It does not exist as a single entity because it is present and clear in terms of being many. On the other hand, it is not created as a multiplicity of things because it is inseparable and of a single flavor. This inherent self-awareness does not derive from anything outside itself. This is the real introduction to the actual condition of things. My brother was a doctor, and he was always, it seemed like, totally uninterested in anything spiritual. Although after our father died, he asked me, what does Buddhism say about what happens to you after you die? And I said, well, if you ask yourself that question long enough, you'll find out. And I didn't think anything would come of it. But after a year, to my surprise, he said, you can't find anything out. But he clearly was retaining that curiosity. And eventually he was diagnosed with cancer, a single discrete tumor in his bladder. He didn't smoke. And, our father had quit smoking very early in our lives. He smoked when he came back from the war, but briefly. And so he wasn't exposed to that kind of thing. But at any rate, here's this tumor. And they decided to do a surgery and remove that tumor and his bladder and create a bladder out of part of his intestinal tract. That was a new procedure back then. This was about 7 years ago. And because he was in such immense good health, he would take 4 short vacations a year and do extreme things. Whitewater canoeing, bicycling all over the world, extended bicycle trips where he would bicycle 100 miles a day up mountains and that kind of thing. And the other was skiing. And so he was in excellent physical condition. And because of that, they gave him 2 courses of chemo before they did the surgery. Then they did this 10.5-hour surgery and recreated a bladder for him and gave him 4 more courses of chemo afterwards. But 6 weeks after the last chemo, he was dead. It was a bit of a shock. We knew he had the cancer, but because it was just a discrete tumor, it hadn't metastasized or anything. We assumed that, when it was removed, that was going to be the end of it, and he'd live a long life, like many of my relatives have. But it didn't happen. It was very interesting that when I found out that he really was going to die that soon, it was just 3 days before he died. And I called him up and I apologized. I said, I'm so sorry for the grief I gave you when we were growing up, because I was intensely jealous of him. And I used to try to make him cry, and I never really succeeded. I used to try to make him mad. I didn't really succeed more than twice. He just was so, okay with things. Anyway, then he said, I've had a good life. I have no regrets. And he laughed when I apologized for the treatment as when we were kids. We were also very good friends. And then when I got the call one morning early saying he just stopped breathing, what happened next was a sense that of kind of a light grief and puzzledness. And I learned many years ago to discern when I was picking up on somebody's feelings and when it was my own. And I'm sure I was picking up on my brother. And then after about 4 hours of that, it transformed into, the only thing I can say is a lucid transparency beyond description. A lucid transparency. There was a sense of profound peace and joy, of clarity, and the rest I can't really describe because it's beyond words. And that lasted for another about 18 hours, and then it dissolved. I have no doubt that my brother had opened to a great depth of understanding. I would say an awakening, really. And we can too. And we don't have to wait till we die to do it. This lucid transparency, this unimpededness that the Tibetans speak of, is here right now with us. And let me continue a little bit with Mitra-roshi's commentary. Try to find my place. If we suppose that because of this, there is nothing at all, then why is it we laugh when something strikes us as funny and weep when something seems sad? I offer once again Zen Master Bankei, who explains it very well. You people have all gathered together here to listen to me speak. Obviously, when I say something, you will hear the words. But if at the same time you hear a dog barking outside, even though not one of you came to the temple to hear a dog bark, won't you all hear its woof? You had no intention to hear it, to perceive a dog's bark, but the instant it barks, you hear woof. That is the Buddha nature. It is like Kanzen Eigen, the elderly couple that wanted a teaching from him. And he had them sit opposite each other, and then he got hold of their top knots, their hairdos, and clunked their foreheads together. And they each, of course, said, ouch! The same. Although with regard to the dog's bark, the mind is mu, sheer nothingness. When the dog barks, the mind hears woof. Not so much as a whisker separates the two. The mind that does not exist yet functions with total freedom is our original nature. Zen Master Linji, the founder of Rinzai Zen, explains this point admirably. There's nothing at all difficult around here. I tell people to see what comes to their eyes, to hear what comes to their ears, to smell what comes to their nose, to talk with their mouth, to hold things with their hands, to move their feet when they walk. Then she, using his typically spirited language, says that from his vantage point, there's no difference at all between Shakyamuni Buddha and anyone else. Everyone sees with their eyes, hears with their ears, speaks with their mouths, grasps things with their hands, and walks, moving their feet. But most of the time, we don't just do that. Most of the time, we hear something and immediately jump into thoughts about it, analysis of it, and so on. And there are times when this is appropriate, where hearing something, hearing someone speak and taking it in and discerning what is meant and responding, that's appropriate. But a lot of times it's yada, 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 yada. And human beings, particularly in this day and age, with all of our electronic equipment, are accustomed to having screens in front of us, noise around us, and we're uncomfortable with silence. We're uncomfortable with simply being, with simply hearing, simply seeing, simply holding, simply walking. And yet, in order to come to awakening, to recognize our true nature and experience the resulting freedom that comes from that, we have to quiet down inwardly and simply hear, simply see, simply wordlessly search within for that truth, for that lucid awareness. With that lucid awareness, who are we? Why are we here? And the deeper we go within this search, the more value our life really holds in terms of relative work, in terms of our relationship with our culture. People these days are so distracted. I once knew someone who lived alone in a 3-bedroom, fully furnished house. And when she got up every morning, she turned on the TV in her bedroom, get herself dressed, leaving it on, go into the kitchen, turn the TV on in the kitchen, which overlooked the living room. It was open plan. And then go into the living room and turn that TV on. So she had 3 TVs blaring at her and was severely uncomfortable if they couldn't be doing that. What are we frightened of? In a word, annihilation. In a word, disappearing. I think, therefore I am. Holds a great deal of truth in it. But who are we really? We're not what we think we are. And when we can see beyond the self-image to the truth, then we are able to respond easily and with great awareness, directly and successfully, really, to circumstances. This is what we seem to intuit. And that's why we sit long hours and work at this inner search. And it works. It works. It works. So I leave you with that so you can continue working in that direction. And we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. Thank you very much for listening.